to give it a minute. And keep chatting. I'm going to keep chatting, and we're going to sort out to get Ben onto the stage. Okay, hi everyone, and welcome. Before we begin, to pay my respects to our elders, past, present, and emerging. They are the traditional owners of our land. I make my home on Wurundjeri, and today Michelle and I are actually in the office together. She's over there wearing a mask, I want you all to know. And we are in the office so that we can bring this to you because all of our children are at home gaming and taking up our internet. So I am really excited about today. I have known Ben's family since the age of 2. And I grew up with his parents in the Bundoora Uniting Church youth group, and there'd be many stories to tell about that. Now, for those of you that don't know, there are 285 million people who are visually impaired in the world today. 39 million of those people are blind. 36% of people face either under or unemployment because they are visually impaired or blind. Now, in Australia, there is 575,000 people who are blind or vision impaired, and 92% of us that are involved in recruitment have concerns about hiring someone with a vision impairment. Of those, 67% of us have concerns about risk, 56% have doubts about a person's productivity, and 31% have financial concerns about hiring a person that is vision impaired or blind. Only 30% of employers are willing to adapt job requirements to suit a person, and 49% of those that are in recruitment have never ever thought about hiring a blind or vision impaired person before. And 83% of businesses lack confidence to do so. So for many of you, you know that I've started Jobs for Australia last year with a great group of people. We have now joined up with Jobs for Humanity, and we are going to work with companies to help them consider, hire and onboard visually impaired people. So part of that is about raising awareness, and I could think of nobody better than Ben Pettingill to talk to us today. Ben is a man that sees the world differently to the way most of us do. He has an incredible story of overcoming extreme adversity, and he knows firsthand what it means to face a sudden change and the challenges of being left to live the rest of your life with a disability. Ben is down to earth, and for those of you who have met him already, incredibly lighthearted and relatable, and he loves having fun with us. And as I said to him, we are very prepared to have fun with him as well, because you can't hold a good talent acquisition person down. Now, Ben, I'm just trying to bring you to the stage. Just give me a moment. I can't seem to find you at the moment. Michelle, would he need to turn his camera on and off again? Yep. Now, Ben, are you able to just get Amy to join you quickly and turn your camera on and off again? No panic. We've got plenty of time in the world. While you're just doing that, folks, if you want to put any questions or make any comments, we do have a chat function, and I will be, here he comes. Oh, and he's gone again. And I will be, try one more time. Just turn your camera on. There we go. All right, folks, we have a chat function. Please put your comments in there. I'll be reading those out to Ben, and we'll stop and do some Q&A at the end. And if we have time, Ben's going to stay on the table, or he was on table 1. He'll stay on that table, and we can all move in and out and have a chat with him, which I highly recommend you do, because he's the dearest boy in the world. So, man, you're a man now.
Thank you.
I'm going to hand you over to Ben.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. You can hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Ben.
Beautiful. Lovely. Andrea, thank you so much for that that lovely introduction, and especially the long-standing family ties. It makes this a special one, and will also be a fun one. So lovely to spend the morning with you. And as Andrea mentioned, I like having a bit of fun. I'm pretty down to earth, but at the same time, I want to make a deal for this morning session, because whether it's when we break out onto tables towards the end, or whether it's throughout this session, what I really want to encourage each and every one of you to feel comfortable with is to ask questions, and ask questions, because it's so important to be curious. And it's so important to be curious when it comes to recruitment, when it comes to getting to know people, and when it comes to disability. Because one thing I am really, really big and strong on is asking instead of assuming. And you'll hear me thread that through this morning's session. So ask, don't assume. And there is not a question that you can ask that will offend me. You'll probably remember back to the ABC television series of You Can't Ask That. I want you to think of this morning's session as exactly that. If that's something that you want to get out of it, if there's questions around interview styles, whether there's questions around recruitment of someone who's blind or who lives with low vision, this morning's the perfect session to ask it, because I actually wasn't born blind. So I know what it's like to be seeing someone in a different situation and go, I wonder this, or I wonder that, or I wonder how they do that, or I wonder what they think of that. I've been in that position, so I know what it's like to want to ask questions and not. Now I'm on the other side of the fence. I'm here to answer those questions. But the deal is, if you get to ask questions, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So I'll be asking some questions of you throughout the session as well. But before we do that, I want to introduce my connection to the topic of seeing clearly in a blurry world, which I absolutely love that topic, connect to it, and I think we all connect to it quite well at the moment, because the world is so blurry that we're living in with the pandemic and COVID and everything that's going on. There's so much uncertainty. There is so much blurriness, but let's find the clarity together this morning. I want to take you back first and foremost to high school. Back when you potentially were at the peak of your game, back when you were a little bit unsure of who you were, when you were just finding yourself. There was so many different phases for all of us as we were going through high school. But one thing's for certain, there was an order to where we all sat when it came to the classroom. And what I'd love to ask first and foremost, and you can just chuck it in the chat, describe or chuck the first word into the chat that pops into your mind when you think about the type of students that used to sit right up the back of your classroom in class at high school. And as they come into the chat, those words that pop into your mind, Andrea will read them out so I can hear them.
Yes.
And we'll see if we can relate to a couple of those.
Okay, talkative, naughty. Joel Broughton has said me, which does sum all of that up. Jack was also a me. I was the kid at the front. It was the cool kids that sat up the bus singing. What was it? Meatloaf at the time for me. Bad out of hell.
There you go. Bit of bad out of hell.
Oh, do you know what, Ben? We have a whole bunch of the cool kids online. It was.
Do we?
There was a whole lot of them that said me. Disruptive, says Josie.
So Josie used to sit up the front with you if she thinks disruptive.
Josie would have been up the front with me for sure. So naughty. The messes, the people that were messy, I'm assuming that means. Yep, so we're getting naughty, talkative. And James Telfer shows his age. It was the smokers. There you go. That's all we've got for now.
Love all of those responses. Beautiful, thank you. And I can definitely definitely agree with most of those. The cool kids used to sit up the back. When we're hearing disruptive, we're hearing those from definitely people who used to sit up the front. And look, I used to sit up the back as well. Probably thinking back, maybe I should have been more so in the middle. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. But I used to think I was one of the cool kids. And sitting up the back one day in year 10, I was in science class, not my favourite subject of all times, but there I was. And the teacher, she was at the front, she was drawing a diagram of the human body on the board. And she was using every single colour of the rainbow. She was drawing every single part of the human body inside and out. I'm not going to go into any more detail about that, but you can use your imaginations, and I'm sure you'll get most of the picture. But let me assure you that it wasn't a great diagram. One thing was for certain, though, when I took a closer look, something didn't seem quite right about it. And I turned to my best mate, Stuart, who was sitting beside me at the time. I said, "Hey, Stu, does that diagram on the board, does that look blurry to you?" And Stu was there looking at it going, "Ben, it's weird. If my body looks like that, it is not going to work for too much longer. But it's definitely not blurry. What do you mean by blurry?" Now, do all of you know that feeling you get when you look at a really, really bright light or the sun for a few seconds too long? Then when you look away, it just takes that split second to readjust. Everything's that tiny little bit hazy. Now, that's similar to what it was like. I had that blurriness, that mini headache, and I couldn't shake it. I was noticing it in my textbooks that I had to read the questions and write the answers to. I was noticing it on my mobile phone. And after class, I just had that gut instinct, that intuition that something wasn't quite right, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. So I turned to the person that I turn to when you're faced with a problem. You need some advice, you need some guidance, you're not sure exactly what to do. Now, for me, growing up, that was my dad. For a lot of us, it's somebody that we trust. It might have been a parent, it might be a brother, a sister, an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent, a teacher. Somebody that we trust, somebody that we go to and we can turn to and lean on in times of need. For me, that was dad, like I said. Not only is dad my dad, he's also my best mate, and always knew what to do when I was faced with an issue and needed some advice and guidance. So I turned to him and explained the situation. "Dad, the diagram on the board's a little bit blurry. I'm noticing it more and more. What do you think I should do?" Now, typical dad, he took a minute to think through the situation first, and he's gone, well, mate, don't worry about it. We'll just wait and see what happens, eh? Gee, great. Thanks, Dad. Thanks a lot for that great advice. Now, looking back now, I trusted Dad. So whatever his advice was going to be, I took it explicitly, and I did exactly that. So I went back to school, and I tried to concentrate on the rest of the day as best I could. The only problem was, without me knowing, Dad then called my mum to tell her. Now, my mum isn't quite as relaxed as my dad on any given day. And I wasn't there for this conversation, and neither were any of us, so I can only imagine how it may have gone down. I can picture Dad getting on the phone full of confidence, making a bit of small talk first, and then Mum maybe saying, "So, Tim, what are you actually calling me for?" And he goes, "All right, I better get to the point. Well, I've spoken to Ben at school, and he said that everything's a little bit blurry." And this is when alarm bells would go off in Mum's head, and she'd automatically start firing questions back. "Well, what did you tell him to do? What do you mean by blurry?" And I think this is probably when Dad started second guessing the advice he'd given me, when he then had to deliver it to Mum and try and convince her that it was good advice. "Well, Sue, of course, I told him not to worry about it." I don't think that would have gone down too well. In fact, I probably think it would have gone down like a lead balloon. And the reason I think that is because I don't know if it's just my mum or if it's a mum thing. I don't know, you can tell me. But my mum's got this rare ability to turn something really, really little into something really, really big. And she did exactly that, because she took over the situation, freaking out, and started giving strict instructions to Dad. Bear in mind, I'm back at school, minding my own business, as I've been told to, with no idea that any of this is going on. I only know what happened next. Dad leaves his work, jumps in his car, flies to school. The announcement comes over at school, Ben, please come to the office with your school bag. Now, I never got to leave school early. Parents were pretty strict like that, so I'm grabbing my bag. I'm running up to the office. Dad's already signed me out, which for a plumber was pretty good going. I'm going, Dad, what are we doing? Where are we going? He goes, Ben, shut up. Don't ask any questions. We're doing what your mother tells us to do. I've got no idea. I was like, well, I don't know either. He goes, exactly. Get in the car. So I got in the car and Dad and I start driving back towards the city where we're getting updates from Mum of where to head and what to do and where to go. And all of a sudden we pull up outside the Eye Hospital in Melbourne and we head into the emergency department, still pretty confused of what to do next. And we sign in and register that we're there, and all of a sudden the doors burst open behind me. Boom, Mum comes running in. She's freaking out. She thinks I'm dying. I'm thinking, Mum, it's okay. I've got a headache. Surely we could have started with Panadol or Nurofen or water or something. What are we doing at hospital? But I'll give it to Mum. Don't get me wrong. Do love her. And she works in a hospital. So she's probably seen some pretty crazy and ridiculous situations. And she's certainly seeing and experiencing some at the moment too with the pandemic. But in this particular case, she jumped to worst case scenario and just wanted to get everything checked out. So 6 hours later, after test after test after test, we eventually got taken into a tiny little room, the three of us, Mum, Dad, and myself, where the doctor was going to come in and deliver the verdict. Doctor comes in, pulls out a pile of notes and says, now, Ben, we've discovered what's going on. You have an inflammation of your optic nerve. Now, your optic nerve is the cord that runs from the back of your eye, plugs into the back of your brain and transfers all the images that our eyes see for our brain to understand them. So that's inflamed, so it's bigger than it should be. That just proves I was paying attention in science class. Now, Ben, don't worry about this at all. It's a very, very easy fix. It'll only take 1 month. What we are going to do is put you on a course of steroids. Now, I was a 16-year-old teenage boy, and I only heard one word in that sentence. Steroids. My eyes lit up. My imagination started running wild with all the possibilities that this was going to bring to my life. I'm looking at the doctor. I'm going, my muscles are going to get bigger. I'm going to get back to school. I'm going to dominate every sports team. My mates are going to think I'm awesome. The girls are going to love me. I'm turning to Mum going, Mum, high five. This is the best idea you have ever had. Now, the doctor didn't share the same excitement that I had. He obviously saw my eyes light up and my imagination run wild, because his response was more along the lines of, Ben, I can see by the look in your eyes there, son, that you've never heard of medical steroids, have you, mate? They will do nearly the complete opposite to what I can see you think they might. There's some horrible side effects, but they will make you better within a month. Now, as much as I would have loved my steroids because they sounded heaps better than his at this point in time, he knew what he was talking about, and I was in the hands of the doctor. We got taken up to the top level of the Eye Hospital. I was put in the ward, steroid drip into my arm, and after convincing Mum in a long-winded argument that she didn't have to stay the night, hold my hand and scare the boogie monsters away, and that I was an independent 16-year-old teenager, her and Dad finally promised that they'd be back first thing in the morning, and they wished me good night. The nurse then came in and said, Ben, it's been a really, really long day. Close your eyes, try and get some sleep. And she then closed those bluey-green hospital curtains around my bed that gives you that 5-star privacy that you get in a hospital. You don't hear the other patients arguing quite as much with the nurses in the middle of the night. I then turned the TV off that was hanging on the curtain rail at the end of my bed, sent my mates and my family a couple of text messages to give them the update, and said I'd be in touch in the morning. I put my phone on the bedside table beside me. I closed my eyes and I tried to get some sleep. The next morning when I woke up and opened my eyes, I looked for nearly the first thing that each and every one of us now look for when we wake up of a morning: our phone. I looked to the bedside table beside me for my phone, but it was gone. And I then thought, all right, if that's gone, what else do I know that's around? The TV. I looked to where it was hanging on the curtain rail the night before, but it was gone. And I then thought, what is still here that I definitely know is still here? My hands, I can still feel them hanging on the ends of my arms. They're definitely still there. And laying in bed, I held one hand up in front of my face. And if you'd like, where you're sitting in front of your computers, just hold one hand up in front of your face and stare in the dead center of your palm. Keep staring. Keep staring. Now close your eyes. That's basically what I saw when I woke up. Overnight, I had just lost 98% of my eyesight, just like that. And now, when the doctors found out about this, as you can imagine, they grew more and more concerned. They were worried. They had no idea what was going on. They did testing over the next 2 weeks. Test after test after test after test. And eventually we got brought back into the hospital, sat back down, and the doctor pulled out an even bigger pile of notes. He said, "Now, Ben, we've discovered what's going on. You don't have an inflammation of the optic nerve like we first thought." Now, it was at that point in time that there was that tiny little part of me that sort of thought, well, I reckon I could have told you that 2 weeks ago when it didn't happen the way you said it was going to. But I was sitting there in that much anticipation, ready and hanging off the next words he was about to say. And then he delivered, "Ben, I'm sorry to say, you've got a rare genetic syndrome called Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy. Unfortunately, this is incurable. It cannot be fixed, and you will be blind for life." My entire body went numb. I couldn't feel a thing. I was in shock. Adrenaline filled my body, and the denial also set in. Mum, she burst into tears beside me. That wasn't too unusual. I was used to Mum crying every now and then. But I knew how serious it was, because it's the only time in my entire life I've ever heard my dad cry. And my family, my friends, everybody around me was grieving. Everybody around me was upset and had a level of uncertainty about them because they didn't know what this was going to mean for my life going forwards. So many people ask me to this day, they say, "Ben, what was that like? Waking up in hospital, opening your eyes and just not being able to see?" And it's such a hard question to answer. It's so hard to describe because for 16 years of my life, 365 days a year, I'd been able to open my eyes every single morning and see every single detail of the world. Every leaf hanging on a tree, every ant walking along the concrete, every single little detail. Not that we necessarily take in every leaf on a tree or every ant on the concrete, because they're such minute details, but we can see them. And we take that for granted. And I'd done the exact same thing because it was something that was naturally there, naturally a part of every day. And suddenly it was gone. So my family, my friends, everyone was worried, like I said. But for me, because the change was that sudden and that drastic, it wasn't going to sink in straight away. It was going to take time. And it took 2 months. 2 months of living in denial. 2 months of just being on this roller coaster. This roller coaster, yes, of ups and downs, but also this roller coaster of adrenaline. This adrenaline where I was the one saying to people, "No, it's all good. I've just lost my eyesight. It's not a big deal." Like trying to laugh it off. Trying to pretend that everything was okay. And as I was in denial, I wasn't using a white cane. I knew my school surroundings pretty well, and I was using the 2% eyesight that I had to try and navigate around, leaning on mates, just trying to get through day after day after day. And eventually, I remember one day walking into school quite clearly. And it was a cold winter's morning, but it was one of those clear, cold winter's mornings. Not cloudy, the sun was coming up, it was foggy. And as I was walking into school, I walked through the primary school and then up towards the main office before going over the hill down into the secondary school. And as I came up towards the main office, I started walking towards the sun, and the light got brighter in my peripheral vision. And all of a sudden, I ran headfirst into a pole outside the main office. And that was pole number 1. I mean, if I was telling the story today, I'd be up to pole 2,730, who knows, however many. I've been in touch and come into close contact with lots of immovable objects. The ones I hate the most these days are those short bollards they put around all the shopping centres so cars don't drive through because they're just at a horrible height. But this was a full-size pole number 1. And I hit this pole hard. And when I say I hit it hard, I hit it that hard that I'd split my eyebrow, cheek, lip, and blood started to pour down my beloved school uniform. And I then sunk to the bottom of the pole. And it was there at the bottom of that pole that it finally sunk in. That I was blind for life. That I couldn't change it. That I couldn't control it. And it was then and there at the bottom of that pole that I had to make a choice. I could either choose to continue to be in denial, continue to not accept what had happened, and drag my situation along with me like a ball and chain, or I could make the choice to accept what had happened, accept that I couldn't change it, and start to embrace living life with a disability. Start to embrace living life with low vision, and to start exploring what that was going to mean for me, my future, potential relationships, careers, all those sort of unknowns were going to be easier to get through, more appealing to explore, and open more doors and opportunities if I chose to embrace and take ownership of that situation instead of continuing to be in denial. And now that doesn't mean it was easy. It was a roller coaster journey of adjusting and adapting from the smallest things to the biggest things. And when I say the smallest things that we do without thinking. Ben, how do you pour a glass of water and know when to stop when you can't see? Because the first time I did it, I got a wet hand. And I thought, well, I can't do that every time. Second time I did it, put my finger in the top. When the water hits my finger, I know when to stop. Still trying to work out how to do it with a hot cup of coffee, but I'm getting there, all right? And now that's a tiny little thing that we do without thinking. Multiply that by all of the other things we do in our lives, both personally on a day-to-day basis, but also professionally, that we do without thinking. All of those things, I had to find a new way of doing, a different way of doing, but it didn't mean I couldn't do them. It just meant I had to approach them from a different angle. And I can share stories of some of the achievements that were sent out in the video prior to this session of getting back to water skiing. And first of all, I got told by doctors to never ever water ski again. Now, just because someone's got a disability, because someone's blind or lives with low vision, doesn't mean they can't do something. Just means that some different parameters and a different approach may need to be taken in order to achieve the same result. And my dad was fantastic with that. He said to me, Ben, we're going to do all the same things that we used to do. We're just going to do it slightly differently. So he did a lot of research and he adapted a helmet, made it waterproof with a two-way radio system in it so that from the boat, he could communicate to me when waves are coming, when we're turning, when we're starting, when we're stopping, in order to be my eyes, but also in order to enable me and empower me to continue to water ski and fulfill that dream and do that thing that I'd always loved to do when I could see, but not let that low vision, that disability stop me from continuing to do it. And that's transitioned the exact same into the professional world. There's so many misconceptions. There's unconscious bias that gets in the way when it comes to being blind and living with low vision. so many. I'm going to share one now, and this is just one to start to get you thinking before we go into some questions and discussion about it. A misconception that I always get, back when we used to be able to do this thing called travel, I don't know if any of us remember it. There used to be these big metal birds that flew in the sky, and we used to be able to sit on them. They're called aeroplanes. When we were able to go on them,
thanks for your sarcasm.
when we were able to go on them, I used to be able to get on and travel all the time for speaking. So traveling all around the country and doing it quite regularly. And all of the time I would get on the plane, I'd get sat down and get on first with the special assistance that was required, because it was just a little bit easier to get on before the crowd in order to find my seat and put my bags away. And the first thing I'd get handed is this A4 card. And I'd say to the hostess, I'd say, sorry, what's this card? And they said, oh, it's the Braille safety card, just so you can have a read, because I've seen you've got the white cane there. I was like, that's great. Are you able to read it to me? And they've said back to me, well, I can't read it. It's Braille. And I said, well, I can't read it. And the misconception is that just because I'm blind, I can read Braille, which is not the case at all. Doesn't mean that Braille doesn't have a place in society. It absolutely does. But because I lost my eyesight when I did, and at the age I did, I haven't continued with Braille. I learned it very briefly and at a basic level initially, but I haven't continued with it because of how amazing technology is. Siri and I, we're like besties. It's a love-hate relationship, but she reads everything else out to me. I've got a screen reader on my computer that reads every email, every software program, every single letter that I type. There's so many apps out there that can help me navigate independently, that can read me recipes, that can take photos of documents and convert them to text almost instantly. There's so much technology out there. Braille's still quite handy if someone is born blind, because I'm now at a point where every bit of information I process is actually auditory. So articles, emails, documents, all of those sort of things are all auditory. So now I start to type and spell phonetically, because I actually haven't seen words for so long. Whereas Braille, you can still read the letters. You can still, when you're listening phonetically, you don't hear an apostrophe or a comma or a full stop. You don't learn punctuation and grammar phonetically. You learn that visually. So Braille's still got a really important role to play in teaching all of those things. So that's a common misconception about being blind or having low vision. Not all people that are blind or have low vision read Braille. So it's important to again, ask and not assume. So that's my experience and my connection to disability. But I think what Andrea and I would love to do now, I could go on sharing some different experiences and some different tips and tricks around overcoming misconceptions and unconscious bias, different recruiting processes, all of that sort of thing. I can go into that, but we want to have a discussion with each and every one of you about what you want to learn from this session.
So, Ben, thank you. There were some lovely comments going up around your wonderful, how articulate you are, how brave you are, and thank you for your incredible story. So, lots of that. Michelle will tell you I had to get the tissues out as usual. I love a good cry. I'm just like your mum. We used to sit at home on the telephone back when it had a cord, and our parents would yell to get off, and 4 hours of crying over the fact that your father kissed me and then dropped me to be with your mum, which I've never forgiven him for.
Oh, look, I've kind of got to support his decision. Otherwise, I might not be here today.
A little bit of too much information there. Now, one of the things, and folks, I just can't see the chat at the moment. I'm just asking Michelle to show me where it is. So What I might do is, if you've got some questions, can you raise your hand? And I'm going to bring you up onto the stage because I'd like you to introduce yourself to them and ask your questions. So if you can just raise your hand, and I will start with one, Ben. So you talked a lot about the accommodations that you've had to make. And when we did our training, what was fascinating for us as TA people, we look at mistakes in CVs, and for many people that can be quite a write-off, and we have to deal with hiring managers that will look at misspelled words and things. By the other tokens, some articles and some information I've read, saying too early in a hiring process that you are low vision or blind can actually affect the outcome. Do you have any thoughts or advice for us as TA people? We should be a lot kinder about looking at mistakes in CVs, but do you have any other advice or comments?
Definitely agree with the looking at it through that, I suppose, kind of lens. I think that's a really important thing. And I think you can also pick up the types and styles of mistakes that are being made. Because if the sentence structure is correct, if the information all in all is correct, and you're not looking at isolated words that are spelled incorrectly, I think that's quite important. If the paragraph and the content is ticking all the boxes, then that's probably more important than the words. But I think what's really important, and the point I want to touch on probably more so, is that one around people who are blind or who have low vision not disclosing straight away in the recruitment process. And I've had it before, and I've spoken to a lot of different people with a lot of different disabilities. Quite often on a job application, you'll have a box that you can tick that says, do you have a disability? Now, I've ticked that box before. 6 more pages open up. And all of a sudden, that's a symbol. That's a symbol that without the company or the recruiter needing to communicate anything else, that says to me, that matters, and that is potentially going to be a black mark against my name. Why do they need to know so much information about me that they don't need to know about somebody else that doesn't tick that box? So now there's so many people with disability that don't tick that box. So if that's in your recruitment process anywhere along the lines, one step you can take straight away to changing that is changing that to something that applies to everyone, disability or not. So it's, is there anything we can do for you to help you be as successful in this application process as possible? So all of a sudden, that could be something that helps a single mum in terms of time of an interview. It could be something that helps me in terms of access needs. It could be something that helps somebody else with a completely different personal situation. So getting rid of that, do you have a disability, is a big one there.
That's actually a brilliant idea. And so James Telfer has a question. So I'm going to bring James up. James is in the older end like me. He was the one that was the smoker at the back of the room.
Thank you for that introduction, Andrea. Love you dearly. And Ben, firstly, just a comment to say thanks so much for sharing your incredible story with us so honestly and so bravely and so articulately. It just obviously you're well practiced in telling it, and it comes across so well. But yes, so thank you for that. And just on your comments with regard to that ticking of the box to say, do you have a disability? So we would have a question which asks what we would hope to be a more kind of sympathetic version of that, which is to say something along the lines of, what special accommodation or what reasonable accommodation, I believe is the phrase, would you require, to be able to attend an interview? So we're sort of asking, do candidates have any circumstances special circumstances that need to be taken account of. So I guess my question is, is the phrasing of that question, important? Would it make you feel more comfortable to answer it if it was, put like that?
Yeah, really, really good question. And I think language is so important. And language is so important more so for people with disability that potentially have had 50, 100. I've known someone, I actually met someone through a course at Vision Australia who had 227 job applications and counting that were all unsuccessful. And that wasn't due to his credibility or his experience. It was because of his situation, which was quite sad in itself. But I think the language is really important, and if it is around that reasonable accommodations, or quite often the language used is, are there any reasonable adjustments that need to be made, or and I think that's where that comes from. It sort of also implies if there's such thing as reasonable accommodations, does that mean your organisation also has a line in the sand that if I ask for something, will that be unreasonable? I think that's probably a question to ask yourself and a conversation to have internally is, does reasonable matter? Because I might ask for something, but I'm not going to ask for actually everything I need, because you've said to me what I'm asking for, or what I'm stating has to be within that category of reasonable, and then that's up to me to try and determine whether or not what I'm requesting is reasonable or not. So that's one point to consider there. And I think trying to, in your head, as an able-bodied person, go, does this question apply to me also? Or do I look at that question and go, oh, that's just for the people with disability? Because if we're looking at the question like that, then I think we can still get better at adjusting the language so that it applies to all, and so that it could benefit all if necessary. So again, something around is there anything we can do to help you be as successful as possible in this process? All of a sudden, anyone could answer that. It might be as simple as, I prefer an interview between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. because I've got to drop kids off for school and pick kids up. That might be as simple as it is, and it's got nothing to do with disability. So I don't know if that answers your question totally, but I think making sure the language applies to everyone and not just disability.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you, Ben, for those thoughts.
No, great question.
It's obvious when you say it, of course.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing, James, how obvious things are that we haven't necessarily thought about or something in a lot of cases at the moment had the time to even think about. But
it is, Michelle, and Ben, you've been around long enough to know the way the world works as well. Sometimes I guess if we had a blank sheet of paper, you can take some of those things into account and write something which is perfectly for the position of someone who has some form of disability. Of course, big companies also have lawyers and legal teams and occupational health and safety people, and they all have opinions about how they want to kind of portray the company and make sure that they're, I'm doing air quotes for you, managing risk and those type of things.
Yeah.
So sometimes I think there are, other considerations that come into, writing what could be the perfect wording for someone to receive, right?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of red tape, especially in the corporate landscape, that needs to be navigated. But I think that basis of making sure that it applies to everyone, I think is the foundation when it comes to language, instead of making it directed just at a certain group of people. So in terms of a tip and a takeaway, I'd be taking that away. And I think if that can get more people with disability through the door and sitting on a seat in an interview, then we're going to end up with more people with disability employed, because then we have a chance to have a conversation about, right, what can we do for you? And you're getting past that initial barrier. And all of a sudden, they're answering questions that you've got without you even needing to ask them, because they can say, right, when it comes to these challenges, I can do this, 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 and this. And then you've got the ability to ask instead of assume, whereas you don't have the ability to ask instead of assume when it comes to an application process.
So, and at the moment, we're doing a lot more virtual interviews and using the technology there. Ben, you and I today, you've come onto a brand new platform here that we had to get your very gorgeous wife to help us just a little bit with at the beginning. So understanding that the technology we sometimes are using may have some implications there, and that if we are interviewing on camera and the person is low and vision impaired, we may need to make some accommodations. We may need to be a little bit more inclusive around the information we provide. We had a debate on our training about, do I sit here and say, I'm a 50-year-old woman with red hair and bright orange sunglasses sitting in an office environment? Is that inclusive? Because if someone's lost their sight at the beginning of their life, that's not necessarily going to make a difference to them.
Yeah, what's orange? What's colour to someone who's born blind? I can picture it because I know what colour is and I can remember that. But I think the interesting part there, Andrew, it's an interesting one. I'd love to hear what the outcome was from the training. But I get the question all the time. Oh, do I need to let you feel my face? So you know what I look like? And I'm like, no, I don't really want to feel your face. Thank you. I haven't met you and I've only just found out your name. I don't think that would be appropriate. And just as you read a book, and this is kind of what I compare it to, when you read a book and then you watch the movie of that book that comes out after the book, and the main character doesn't look like what you thought the main character would look like. Now, you've never seen that character in the book, but your subconscious mind has created a picture of what they look like. Now, it didn't take a description of exactly every feature of them to come up with that picture in our head. Our subconscious mind does that. Now, I've got a picture of what James looks like in my head. I've got a picture of what Andrea looks like in my head. I've got a picture of what Michelle looks like in my head. Whether it's right or wrong doesn't really matter. I actually think it's a bit of a blessing in disguise, and it's a blessing in disguise when it comes to meeting people, getting to know people, and potentially interviewing people as well, is you actually get to know them based on who they are on the inside instead of what they look like on the outside. So I don't necessarily think it's a requirement or you should feel like you have to describe what you look like. I think it's actually more inclusive not to, but letting people know that if there's any information that they'd like you to share with them, that you're more than comfortable with doing so, and all they need to do is ask. And they also can ask in, say, a direct message function or a direct message in the chat if it's an interview with a panel, or if they're on a group meeting that they don't want to put it in front of the whole group, they can at least go to someone that they trust and feel comfortable with and ask those questions directly.
Yeah. And we haven't really got any other questions here. I'm just doing a quick double check in the chat for you. By the way, Ben, halfway through this, my computer went flat. So I'm now sitting on Michelle's computer and she uses hers completely different. Okay, so we haven't got any other comments. One of the things that I've been laughing about or chuckling to myself about is that every time I've spoken to you, I've used the words see, take a moment to read it. And there was a question in our training about, is it okay to say see you later or have you seen the latest Marvel movie? And people can get very caught up in that language. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love this one. And so many people second guess themselves because the reason we do is there's still fear associated with disability and that fear of offending. And as the world becomes more and more politically correct, and there's so many more ways of highlighting when people are doing wrong and saying wrong, that people don't want to speak out of turn and people don't want to offend. And for me, there's probably a line where I think we can cross it and go too far. And I think that's exactly the line when you start going into, I don't say to people when we've finished the conversation and when I'm jumping off Zoom, all right, I'll hear you later. No one says they're going to hear you later. It's a figure of speech to say that we will meet again. And I see differently to the way you see. Somebody else sees slightly differently because they wear glasses. Seeing doesn't necessarily have to be literal, and reading doesn't have to be reading with our eyes. It's because of the way we stereotypically know those words to be and mean. Therefore, we go, reading must be with our eyes and reading a book. But the way I read is through Audible, through a screen reader, and through voiceover technology, and through Siri. That's my way of reading. I still read, I just read differently.
Yeah.
And I still see, I just see differently. I actually feel like I actually see clearer now because I don't have the distractions, I don't have the misconceptions and the preconceived ideas that I used to have due to my eyesight. Because I actually have to get to know people from the inside out instead of from the outside in. I've got clearer vision now. I've got true vision now instead of just 20/20 vision.
Yeah, terrific. Ben, we've hit our time and a few people have to jump off. And please say if you don't, you can say it to me. But do you have a few minutes to hang around and people can join you on?
I can definitely do that. More than happy to.
Oh, you are a gorgeous boy. Man. Ben Pettingill, your story has inspired all of us. There's lots of comments here about such great insight. What a great session. Thank you so much, Andrea and Ben. Really great session. So wonderful. Thank you so much, Ben, for your story and sharing. Lots of people have to jump off for another thing. Incredible session. So, Ben, thank you so much. I am so keen when we get back to in-person events to for you to come along and do this with us again. So next,
that'd be great.
2022. I'm going to turn the presentation off, folks. Thanks for joining us. If you can hang around and you want to join Ben, he's the bright yellow BP, and I think he should be sitting on table 1. So we can take 5 of you on table 1. Come and join us on that table. So Ben, stay there, and I'm just going to turn the presentation off now.
Perfect.
It'll be a few minutes, few seconds.